like going down the bold faces.
Welcome back.
Of life. I saw you recently.
Let's listen back to Greg
You were on your
Sankey,
way to
the
see
SEC
Mike Krzyzewski,
commissioner.
and I just have to ask about that.
Well, he went out over me in an interview with you, like staying around for an interview in Charlotte. So we had a meeting in Charlotte, and I had talked with Coach Can, his Sirius XM show a few years ago, and we had swapped notes, and then we were at Global Leadership Summit in South Barrington, Illinois, together, and I said I'd like to just come have a conversation about basketball. Some efforts to maybe make the game look similar. You look at the European influence in the NBA draft. Where are we missing it in the developmental space? And he was incredibly gracious, drove up to Durham, spent 2 hours, just talked about, you know, he's doing some work with the NBA. He thinks about basketball. I think you see, even with Nick Saban, the freedom to think a little bit more deeply about the game. And I just appreciated, first of all, seeing his office was pretty cool. It was like a museum of basketball accomplishments over the last 40 or 50 years. And then just talking about how the college game has to continue to adapt. We probably won't do it perfectly, but we need to be more intentional about the conversations, and that was the focus of the dialogue.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I can't ask you about. They are confidential, but it is just fascinating. And I mean, certainly you were at the vanguard of this sport, but when you're sitting there with a Krzyzewski or a Tim Cook or the head of a New York bank, what do they respond to you about? I'm sure they're equally curious about what you do.
Probably more curious about what we do, and in fact, in these conversations right now, it's like, explain to me what's happening in college sports. And it's about a 4 or 5 minute presentation, try to hit the high points. And this is political leaders, financial leaders, business leaders. And inevitably, I'll have a response where there's about a 5-second break after I finish, and they'll say, and this is universal, that's the most complicated situation I've ever heard of. And that's professional sports commissioners, some formerly in that role, high-powered legal counsel, financiers, corporate titans, politicians. And then you have to go back and break down kind of what are the elements that need to change right now. And we're obviously working through that. But those conversations will help me refine what I share and help me think about how I respond to questions. And how do we help people understand these are great opportunities. I mean, you just saw it with LSU's women's basketball team. The ability to talk about the relationships that are built. You know, I told you the story about Paul Skeens at the All-Star Game, saying I'm going to go back to Baton Rouge. I've had that over and over with football players in the NFL say, I'm going to go back to campus. That feels like home. We have to communicate that even more effectively, because this is too important to just throw our hands up and cede it to somebody else to take control of.
A few more minutes here with the commissioner. When you talk to these people, whether it's Roger Goodell or Manfred or any of them, there has to be a moment where you it sounds desperate, it sounds like the sky is falling, and then you go to Dallas last week and you see that spectacle, or Tuscaloosa 2 weeks before that, and then this weekend alone. I mean, it doesn't seem to mesh very well, because we talk to fans, they are more passionate than they've ever been.
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's a lot of positive in there, and that's where it's so much easier to write about the problems, right? There's a Sports Business Journal piece about our move to ABC and the viewership increase that we're experiencing. And, you know, Paul, we did this early, and I think I've said to you, history is going to judge me. I thought, you know, maybe a couple times a season we'd have noon, midday, prime time games on ABC, and we've been populating those windows regularly. There have been some others, but then the viewership numbers that we've thrown in. You know, we went head to head with the CBS game. Remember that network with Oklahoma and Texas, and we didn't have the close games on CBS, and it outrated that window. I think that's the interest we've built, and that's a credit to our campuses. Again, I occupy the seat out of responsibility. But man, I've been to Lexington, to Oxford. I was in Fayetteville, Arkansas for their game against Tennessee. I'll be around all kinds of places. You know, over and over, you feel this passion, this intensity. and this joy where people come together. And I talked about that during media days, that this is one of these places where, yeah, we have disagreements and sometimes fans act out a little bit more than we want, but you have blue collar, white collar, Republican, Democrat, different races, different socioeconomic programs. You can rally around a football field and have a bit of a release from the everyday, and I think that's enormously healthy in our culture.
Yeah, not to kick them all the way down, but just last weekend, I mean, the noon game did a monster number. The second game, and it wasn't just up against a random CBS. We're talking Penn State at USC. It's not. You can't really do much better than that from a cross-country matchup.
Yeah, and Ohio State Oregon was a great game and outrated on Fox. We did on ABC, and a great game in Baton Rouge, and that will happen, and that's part of the competitive respect that
We had two
share.
overtime games going on at the same time.
Oh yeah, when you think about the rating for the Alabama Vanderbilt game on the SEC network, I think that peaked at 7 million. Is the number I saw projected. Wow. That's huge, especially in the cable area where you have diminishing cable, just to attract people to that storyline. And we're a lot of things, and people have a lot of opinions about the SEC, but we certainly are not dull ever.
No, and to the point. I don't want to say fans don't care about all these critically important things that are going on, but they do love the games more than anything else.
I'm asked, I grew up near Syracuse, as I said earlier, the days of like Dwayne Washington playing his whole career, those were different days. I wish we'd go back to that. Patrick Ewing being at Georgetown, so you had that rivalry and that focus. Those are meaningful things. Chris Mullen at St. John's, you kind of go down the list from those days. Well, that was 40 years ago, and as much as we cherish what was, we're dealing with what is in front of us. I don't think it has to be the way that it is. And fans do ask about that. And I do think there's an expectation that young people have a growth in their benefits. That's why we're dealing with the House settlement. But also the desire for some continuity in our rosters, the desire for some kind of competitive framework, because there's really no competitive sporting situation on the globe where there's not a competitive framework. And as states have legislated and taken away the right to oversee, the ability to oversee, not providing consumer protection for young people and change standards based on the border in which you live, we've lost that competitive framework. We need to get back to that. I do think fans expect that, but they still cherish those rallying moments around their favorite team.
Well, we'll leave it there. Just an incredible conversation. Commissioner, it is. I always get off the subject, but I'm fascinated by your travels and by your encounters.
I am too. I appreciate the airlines. You've done pretty well, knock on wood. So we'll experience again tomorrow. And next time in Charlotte, I'll spend longer. We can have a longer conversation in person on the air.
Thank you very much. The Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference joining us, and we'll take a short break.